Good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome everyone to today's subcommittee hearing titled Examining Two GAO Reports Regarding the Renewable Fuel Standards. Thanks for being here. This subcommittee's second hearing on the Renewable Fuel Standard, and my fourth hearing total on this topic since being elected to Congress. Committed to continuing oversight of the RFS until we find a solution to what has become this deeply flawed program. In 2005, Congress established the RFS with the goals of reducing our nation's dependence on foreign oil and lowering greenhouse gas emissions by mandating that biofuels be blended with domestic transportation fuel in increasing volumes until the year 2022. After that time, the Environmental Protection Agency will have wide latitude to decide the volume of biofuels that must be blended into the gasoline supply. However, the situation has changed pretty dramatically since the RFS enactment in 2005 and its subsequent 2007 revision. Demand for oil in the transportation sector is lower than originally predicted, in part due to heightened fuel economy standards and sluggish economic growth. Further, given the substantially increased domestic oil production resulting from the shale oil boom, the U.S. also imports much less oil than initially forecasted. For instance, in 2005 and 2007, we were importing 60% of our oil. Now it's 27%. Through a series of hearings, I've worked to determine the structure and viability of the RFS to achieve its goals. Specifically, I've tried to understand the RFS through the eyes of the EPA and appreciate how difficult it is for the agency to administer the program. Congress created the unworkable RFS formula. The EPA is left trying to make it work anyway. EPA is required to release the final volumes of biofuels to be blended in the gasoline supply by November the 30th of the preceding year to allow industry participants and other stakeholders to comply and plan for the future. Between 2009 and 2015, EPA failed to meet this November 30th deadline and only finally released final mandated volumes for 2014 through 2016 on November the 30th, 2015. 1 year late for the 2015 volumes and 2 years late for the 2014 final volumes. I'd like to recognize that the EPA has released its 2017 volumes on November the 23rd, meeting the statutory deadline, in fact, beating it by all of 7 days. You're making up ground. Recognizing the difficulties the EPA faces with the RFS, on April the 6th, 2015, I asked GAO to examine the viability of the RFS and determine whether the program will be able to meet its goals in the future. It has taken GAO approximately 19 months to conduct a thorough, independent analysis of the RFS and finalize its conclusions. In order to reach its conclusions, GAO, in coordination with the National Academy of Sciences, convened a group of stakeholder experts from industry, academia, and the nonprofit sector to produce 2 reports on the RFS, both of which were released Monday, November the 28th, 2016. GAO's first report determined that advanced biofuel production is unlikely to meet the RFS's increasing production targets. GAO noted that advanced biofuels are still too expensive for stakeholders to produce at necessary levels to meet the RFS increasing targets through 2022, even with government-funded R&D and mandated subsidies. Despite the federal government spending of $1.1 billion between fiscal years 2013 and 2015 for advanced biofuel research and development, GAO determined that advanced biofuel targets are unattainable. In its second report, GAO concluded that the RFS is unlikely to meet its goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. The production of advanced biofuels, which should reduce greenhouse gas emissions, will remain too limited to meet the program's greenhouse gas reduction targets. For example, in 2015, cellulosic biofuel, an advanced biofuel category, was produced at a meager 142 million gallons, less than 5% of the statutory target of 3 billion gallons. This hearing will give GAO the opportunity to present its findings on the RFS from these 2 reports and the EPA to comment on the findings. With the release of the GAO reports, we have an independent government auditor's findings that confirm the stances many in Congress, including myself, have come to hold, that the RFS is not sustainable and will not meet its intended goals. This program yields few benefits, but it inflicts substantial cost on consumers. Rather than continuing with an unwieldy program which consistently fails to meet its targets and goals, it's time for Congress, the next administration, and the American public to do away with the RFS. Here's my comparison. Last year, Congress looked again at education. 15 years ago, we created No Child Left Behind in a very eager effort to do what is best for our kids in the future. There was a whole series of mandates that were put in place with No Child Left Behind. 15 years later, Congress looked at it again and said those mandates were the wrong way to go, and we fixed it. We came back in wide bipartisan majorities after extensive research and examination and said it's time that we do away with these mandates and do education a different way. It's not that we don't like education. We do. We just went in the wrong direction with No Child Left Behind, and we fixed it. It's not that any of us are opposed to ethanol. It's a good fuel source. It's a good octane booster. It's in the fuel supply right now. It's not that I meet anyone that's opposed to ethanol. It's a series of mandates that were put in place and volume requirements that are not sustainable. I'm delighted to have the EPA's Ms. Janet McCabe and GAO's Mr. Frank Rusco here today as witnesses to engage in a productive conversation on the RFS. I look forward to continuing this subcommittee's oversight of the RFS with my colleagues and our witnesses today. I will recognize the Ranking Member Heidi Heitkamp for her opening statement when she arrives. She's running a little bit behind, but as we always say, the lady is never late. So when she gets here, I'll allow her to be able to do her opening statement. With that, let me swear in our witnesses. If you would please stand. You swear the testimony that you're about to give before the subcommittee will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
I do. Thank you. Let the witnesses, will the record reflect the witnesses answer in the affirmative? You may be seated. Let me do a quick introduction for both of you, and then when Senator Heitkamp arrives, even if it's after your testimony, I may have her do an opening statement as well. Frank Rusco is the Director of the Government Accountability Office, Natural Resources and Environment Team, leading work on a broad spectrum of energy issues. Mr. Rusco holds both a master's degree and a PhD in economics from the University of Washington in Seattle. Janet McCabe is the Acting Assistant Administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency's Office of Air and Radiation, having previously served in the OAR's Principal Deputy to the Assistant Administrator. Ms. McCabe was also the Executive Director of Improving Kids Environment Incorporated in Indianapolis, Indiana, and from 1993 to 2005 held leadership positions in the Indiana Department of Environment Management Office of Air Quality. Ms. McCabe served as Assistant Attorney General for Environmental Protection in Massachusetts and graduated from Harvard College in 1980 and Harvard Law School in 1983. Thank you both for being here as well. And with that, I would recognize the Ranking Member for opening statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.